No matter what we look like, where we live, or what's in our wallets, we all want great public schools. Educators are trusted professionals, leaders in our communities. We are best equipped to make school and learning decisions so students can thrive. What you've accomplished and all that lies ahead, that's leadership. Leadership takes time. It takes emotional and intellectual energy. So, rest when you must, but know that this is our time. Equity can't wait. Justice can't wait. Our students and our colleagues can't wait. A powerful few have tried to divide us, giving resources to schools with mostly white students, but not even covering the basics at schools with Black and brown students. We can transform public education, our profession, our association, and our democracy. No single leader can do it alone. It takes all of us, educators, parents, partners, students. Through our leadership, the democracy that was meant for some will finally include all. Welcome back for the final day of the 2021 NEA Virtual Leadership Summit.
Hi everyone, my name is Takeru Nagayoshi. I also go by TK. I am a high school AP English and research teacher in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and also the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. Now, even though we're not physically here together, spaces like this are so important because they affirm my personal belief that the growth, the development that we make as leaders happen not in isolation, but in community. If you think about it, it's incredibly ironic considering how none of us are here together physically and how, personally speaking, I have felt utterly alone and isolated all throughout this year. Even from teaching, right? I am in an empty classroom, pushing through full days of solitary remote teaching, and still wrapping my head around the fact that there are students whose faces that I have yet to see in person. And so needless to say, these past few months have been super difficult, and I know as a teacher I'm not alone in that. And I felt small. I've questioned my own impact as a teacher. And as the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, this role that kind of requires me to be positive all the time and to embody the brilliance of all the educators in the Commonwealth, I've really felt like an imposter. I've also been equipped to withstand these pressures. And that's because I've had my community. I've had my people like my colleagues who commiserate with me and hold me accountable. People like my friends, my family members who stand by me through all the highs and the lows that I experience. And of course, my students who ground me and who inspire me in a sense of purpose. You see, our best buffers against the disillusionment that I was talking about, the things that we're weathering through right now, are found in our communities and other people. Because when you think about the problems that we have, the problems that our students are going through, right? These aren't just things that we experience in isolation and things that my colleagues across the hallway share, but also things that educators all across the country are sharing as well. And so the true magic of collective action happens when we recognize that our interests are aligned and we use that power of collective action to affect meaningful change. And that's why it's important that we're here developing and investing in our leadership today. And opportunities like this summit are what can make and affect meaningful change. When I was in the first grade, Miss Mari, my Japanese teacher, taught us the kanji character for human, or hito. It's really simple. It's basically two brush strokes, right? Two brush strokes that overlap in what resembles an upside down Y. And Miss Mari, she tried to make us imagine two people who are leaning against each other, right? In order to create this hito formation. And it's a really silly mnemonic for elementary school kids, but I think it gets across this deep message. Because inherent in that kanji for human is this idea of a community, that we're only whole in relation to other people, and that the essence of our own humanity as individuals is found in others. Even in America, right? We hear that term, it takes a village to help our students thrive. But it also takes a village to make a good teacher too, and also a good leader. So I ask you, what kind of education leader are you? What is your village? And what are you going to do to create and nurture a community? And what are you going to do with what you've learned at the summit? Because being a good leader, to me, is not really about what you do as an individual, but about what you accomplish with and for other people. It just so happens that by doing so, you feel saved yourself as well.
Buenos dias. Good morning and welcome back, everyone. This has been an amazing summit so far. I've truly been blown away, not just with the turnout, but with the quality of the sessions, the speakers, and also the important participation from each and every one of you. I want to give huge kudos to our staff and all our partners who pulled together an amazing experience. They've worked really hard to design the summit to help us not only understand ourselves, but how to engage and organize diverse communities to ensure that our students, public schools, and communities thrive. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you, our participants, our amazing leaders who have come to learn, to grow, to share and strengthen your ability to continue to enhance and perform this miracle I call caring. You know, it's something that dwells in the heart of every educator. And it is a gift that we have specialized in our own way. It allows us to give a word of praise and encourage students when we know they can't succeed. It empowers us to extend ourselves to be leaders beyond the classroom and the school walls and into our communities. It is what drives our passions into overdrive when our students and their families are in greatest need. So thank you for being here and showing your students and fellow educators that you care, and showing how much you appreciate them and what they mean to you. This is our last day together, but it will be equally as exciting and inspirational as the last 2 days. On Friday, we remember our President Becky talk about our individual being, self-care, and how to examine and lead ourselves in what she called willful intention. And yesterday, Princess shared her passion about the importance of recognizing that our students bring their entire community experiences into our classrooms, their language, culture, and unique life experience. And therefore, it is up to us as educators to meet them where they are individually, culturally, developmentally, and foster inclusive learning environments that enhances students' sense of belonging and success. Today, we're going to focus on our collective being and doing, and how we take everything we have learned in these 3 days and harness it to impact change in our communities. The video you just saw spoke to this responsibility. Takaro is absolutely right. We are a community, not just your campus community, your district community, your city, your state, and as a nation. We are a community, and our ability to impact change in our communities can never happen in isolation, but only through collective action. We all know that nothing in this great nation of ours was ever achieved without collective action. It was Frederick Douglass who once said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." And in that same speech, he talked about the struggle of emancipation, both as a moral and physical. See, I'm not just talking about the physical action like the insurrection we all witnessed on January 6th. The physical action we must take is organizing for collective action to create the systemic change and dismantle institutional racism. Reverend Barber, who will be here with us later this morning, often refers to the moral fusion of politics and working for justice. Collective action is a value. It's what we believe as a nation and as the National Education Association. But here's the catch. There is no collective action without the right leadership. Effective collective action is not brought about by charisma alone. nor by our compulsion or fears. Collective action is birthed through organizing and unity of action in pursuit of a common purpose. Our purpose is clearly found in our vision, mission, and core values. But the question is always, how do we bring it to life to manifest real change in our classrooms, schools, and communities? See, my dog here is ready for collective action, as you can hear. He wants to get in on it himself. We've seen our collective resolve as we help to pass the American Rescue Plan. But let me tell you how I did it in my own local. See, he's just as excited as I am. Because we realized early on as we decided as a local union that if we wanted to be more than just about legal protection and liability insurance, we had to change the culture of our union. We began by training our worksite leaders to have one-on-one conversations. This helped identify issues we would organize around either at the campus level or at the district level. I had to lead by example and organize my campus to show up at a school board meeting. See, as a high school special education teacher at the district alternative placement campus for discipline, we had our share of issues. Under our superintendent, there was a practice of using our campus as a dumping ground, not just for students, but staff as well. If the district was trying to drive out an educator out of the district, they would place them on our campus to work with the most challenging students and force them to resign on their own. As one of a handful of teachers who actually applied to teach on my campus, I quickly picked up on that practice. We had a high turnover rate. After my second year there as an early career educator, we had managed to bring in and hire a majority of educators who wanted to be there and make a difference with the most at-risk youth in our district. I didn't know the terminology at the time in regards to racial and social justice, but we knew there was a significant overrepresentation of Black and Brown students compared to the rest of the district. Our students were on the school-to-prison pipeline express lane. After our principal resigned, the superintendent was ready to place the next principal on our campus. I organized our campus to show up at the next school board meeting, helped coordinate speeches, and all spoke with passion about why we wanted to be there and why our next principal had to believe in our students as much as we did. To make a long story short, our campus won, our students won, and the superintendent created a committee of educators and parents to be part of the interview committee to select our next principal. It changed the entire culture of the campus, and my colleagues learned the powerful lesson of collective action. We had a moral obligation to our students and understood that we understood that our target to get what we wanted was the superintendent. But we also understood that the secondary target and only body that could force the superintendent to do what was right was the elected school board. We had several one-on-ones with school board members, and we also had started to organize politically to elect a friendly school board majority. The power of collective action is what enables us to dismantle the power over us and transition to power with. And this is why I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Barber today. The Reverend Dr. William J. Barber is the president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Reverend Dr. Barber is also the architect of the forward-moving moral movement that gained national acclaim with its Moral Monday protest at the North Carolina General Assembly in 2013. These weekly actions drew tens of thousands of North Carolinians and other moral witnesses to the state legislature. More than 1,200 peaceful protesters were arrested, handcuffed, and jailed. On September 12 of 2016, Reverend Dr. Barber led a Moral Day of Action, the largest coordinated action on a state capital in U.S. history, calling for state governments to embrace a moral public policy agenda. And personally, I'm grateful for the partnership and solidarity Reverend Barber and his team demonstrated when they joined us in my hometown of El Paso in 2019, when a domestic terrorist took the lives in an act of hatred. So NEA family, help me welcome and give a huge virtual welcome and love to our speaker for this morning, Dr. Reverend William Barber. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Noel. Thank you to all of you who are gathered. Gracious God, help us and hold us, hear our cries, but also strengthen us with your power. For we ask it in your name. Amen. To my dear sister and my president, Becky Pringle, whom I'm finding out we have more and more in common than I knew, to Princess Moss and to Noel, you, and to Kim Anderson, and to all of the members of the NEA. I am the son of public educators who left the Midwest, came back to the South right after the March on Washington to be a fundamental part of fighting for desegregation. And so education and fighting for educators is in my blood. My home that I grew up in was often the meeting place for educators, Black and white and others in Eastern North Carolina. Because of the time, I want to move quickly into a conversation this morning with you. I want to borrow something from a book. The title of it is It's Time to Teach. And I want to borrow something from a sermon that said, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. And I want to combine them. It's time to teach again, that nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. And now I'm a preacher. This is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. So I'd like to open with a quick look at two texts, three as touchstones for this time of reflection. The first one is in Amos, and in the Message Bible, it simply reads, "Do you not know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. No more excuses, no more religious services alone. I want fairness, rivers of it. This is what I want, says God. And woe unto you who are at ease in Zion until justice comes." The second one is Isaiah chapter 1, when Isaiah the prophet told the nation, we need to learn to do good. Learn to do good. Take our lesson and seek justice, rebuke the ruthless, defend the children, and plead for the rights of the women and the widows. And the last one is a favorite text in the civil rights movement. Oftentimes when their houses were blown up and they were watching the fire consume their very possessions, and sometimes they're members of their families' lives. Somebody in the midst of that, when people felt like quitting and felt like turning to violence versus nonviolence, they would repeat Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39. But we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so borrowing from that book that has been recently written about Julian Bond's life, A Time to Teach, and borrowing from the title of the last sermon that Dr. King preached, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. That is what I want to talk about on this morning. You know, his last sermon, before he was shot down outside the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Dr. King offered this conclusion. Some people think that sermon was I've been to the mountaintop, but like I have a dream, that was a closing. It was what we call in the Black church sometimes a hoop, a necessary point of joy because you've had to deal with so much pain. But Dr. King said in '68, declared that night that America was sick. And yes, there had been the passing of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 and the Brown versus Du Bois decision in '54. But Dr. King looked at the state of the nation with poverty, racism, and militarism. And he said, let me say this as I move to my conclusion. We've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. And nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through. If it means leaving your work, if it means leaving school, do what we have to do, but we've got to be concerned about one another, because we either go up together or we go down together. Julian Bond, as you know, was our professor of the movement, if you will. And just like that great educator, Septima Clark, who taught not only in public schools, but citizenship schools, he taught us that we have to, in the movement, teach. Every generation must be taught movement and the themes of the movement and what must be done in its moment. Because in a sense, every generation has our Edmund Pettus Bridge. Every generation has our challenge. Martin Luther King, as you know, was that preacher, prophet, and practitioner. But his words were not just soaring oratory. His preaching served as a guide for confronting racism and poverty and war. Some people forget that Dr. King's first preaching in March was right after the Brown decision in 1957, on the anniversary of the Brown decision. And he talked about what that decision meant, striking down separate but equal. And then he declared at the end of it, give us the ballot. Give us the ballot. Like the prophet Amos, Dr. King knew, Julian Bonds knew, Septima Clark knew what we must know. We must have a never quitting commitment until justice comes. We must know that our nation has to constantly be taken to school. This nation has to, my grandma used to say, boy, somebody needs to learn them something. Now, it's a bad English, but it was real good philosophy. She knew that you have to learn this nation something or teach this nation something. And you have to have a movement, and a movement of people committed that will not shrink back, but will press on, believing that the nation's soul can be redeemed and that things don't have to be the way they are. Now, it's interesting that the night the King said nothing would be more tragic, President Pringle told us for us to turn back now, he didn't live to see another 24 hours. But a half century later, his words are just as alive as they were then. Because we still face a time in which, yes, the struggle feels long. Yes, we wish that all of the injustice had been ended, but 53 years after the assassination of Dr. King, we are still battling in full view forms of injustice and the underside of policy agenda, the underside of systemic racism and poverty, and attacks on public education and denial of health care and ecological devastation and the war economy and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. Just yesterday, I was on MSNBC and the reporter asked me to respond to a comment that's being made now and propagated by the extremists who took over the Republican Party. And they have decided to say that helping children with these tax cuts is the devil's work. Can you imagine? Yes, we have a new president, leadership in Congress, but especially because of that, it's time to teach that nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn now. We who would honor the legacy of struggle that has borne us and borne our organizations like the NEA and the Poor People's Campaign must clearly see that the storms that are still raging about us is a reaction to the possibility and the power of a growing multiracial democracy. It is no accident that January the 6th insurrection followed immediately the election of Warnock and Ossoff out of Georgia. The commentaries, many of them were wrong when they said we've never seen that but twice in America. Poor people and union people and those who fight for justice have always at some point had to meet violence as an attempt to turn back justice. And it is no accident that when Georgia stepped forward and we saw an African-American man and a Jewish man from the Deep South, elected in the Deep South by a multiracial coalition, committed to public education, committed to living wages, committed to health care for all, that following that step toward the third, into the more of a third Reconstruction, we would see a violent insurrection. We check history, that has always happened when you sow the poison lies of racism and xenophobia, and and you sow the lies of greed. And so even with change, we must teach this nation that nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. In fact, let us not forget that we cannot merely think that if we get back prior to the pandemic, then we have actually gone to the right place. Before the pandemic, 140 million people in this country were poor and low wealth. 52% of all children, 39 million children. Before the pandemic, 750 people were dying a day from poverty, 250,000 a year before the pandemic. 87 million people were uninsured or underinsured before the pandemic. 4 million families could get up every morning and buy unleaded gas, and they couldn't buy unleaded water before the pandemic. We were spending $800 billion a year on the war economy. 54 cents of every discretionary dollar went to the war economy, and less than 15 cents went to education and healthcare and infrastructure and living wages. Before the pandemic, there was a recession and pain among the poorest of us. Before the pandemic, all over this country, in state houses and in the Congress, there had been attacks after attack after attack on teachers and defunding public education. And it was then that COVID hit. And what COVID did is, my daughter, who's PhD in public health, says with her colleague, the pandemic exposed the fissures of systemic racism and systemic poverty that already existed. And what have we seen in this pandemic? Millions have died, but not just millions. Those who have died the most have been the poorest among us. Those are low wage. The poor and low wage people have been the first forced to go to work. Underpaid teachers have been the first that people want to force back to work without providing the things necessary to bring us back to work. The first poor and low wage people have been the first to force to go back to work, the first to get infected, the first to get sick, the first to go to the hospital, and the last and the first to die. And even the first CARES Act gave 84% of all the money to corporations and banks. And then the 16% was split up between the poor and schools and educators. We have found out in the midst of this pandemic that some people are more committed to treating corporations like people and people like things. We've seen in the midst of this pandemic that billionaires have made over $1.3 trillion in this pandemic, while tens of millions of people have lost their job. While in the midst of a pandemic, we still did not see healthcare guaranteed or wages increase. And 8 million more people fell into poverty between March of last year and November of last year. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. We must teach this. We must teach this. And look, this past week at the bill we just passed. Think about it. We've been in a pandemic over a year. This is the first bill that focused on the people that have been hurt the most and who have died the most and who died the first. Think about that for a minute. And this bill is significant. It's major. American Relief Bill. But it can't be a cause for quitting. We need not just celebration, but we need concentration and commitment to change. Think about what we had to do to get the bill. To get the bill, some tried to hide behind a parliamentarian rule. And you need to understand that that parliamentarian rule has been used time and time down through history. It was first used to rule out of order every anti-slavery piece of legislation in the 1800s. And that same parliamentary rule has been used time and time again through history to try to block labor rights. And that's what some people wanted to hide behind, rather than do right by the poor and low-wage people and public educators. And so to get the bill, we had to watch 49 extremists who call themselves Republican and 8 white Democratic senators, 3 women, 5 men, say no to a living wage, a minimum wage of $15 an hour. No. Teachers are mostly, you understand this because far too long we've asked teachers and public educators and those in the public education who take care of our best, the diamonds that God has given us, our children, for the least resources. So to get this part of the bill, we saw that blocked. And yes, the bill passed, thank God, it's significant. But then we look again and we see that in order to get it passed, many of the things had to be made temporary in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of all that was existing prior to the pandemic. We passed a bill, and yet the provisions to lift children are temporary. Some of them only last till December. You know, in Africa, they used to ask the question, if you want to know how a nation is doing, ask this question, how are the children? And when we see that we still have forces that would block helping children and block lifting people out of poverty, even in the midst of a pandemic, and then would only vote for it if things are temporary, we need to learn again that nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back. But not only this, and because of the bill must we continue to push, as long as there are those who will argue that George Floyd was not murdered, who would ask us to not believe what that 17-year-old girl captured on video. As long as the Black Attorney General of Kentucky refused to prosecute the killers of Breonna Taylor, and now Senator McConnell is trying to change the rules in Kentucky so that the Senate there, the legislature there no longer appoints, the governor no longer appoints his replacement, but he can report his replacement. And guess who he wants to appoint? The Attorney General, the Black Attorney General, who would not prosecute. As long as those realities are in our midst, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. And just this week, just the other day, the U.S. House of Representatives, the PRO, protecting the right to organize. I know President Pringle was right there in the middle of all of that. 42 House Democrats from the South were co-sponsors. This is huge. The bill is one of the most ambitious attempts to strengthen the rights of workers and unions in decades for all of those states like North Carolina, South Carolina, and others that have so-called right to work laws, which are basically laws to block unions. And this bill is trying to overturn what labor historian Michael Pierce said, the anti-union measures that were put in place in America to prevent what the industrialists and planters in both the North and the South saw as interracial organizing threat to the racial and economic order. In other words, right to work laws were put in place intentionally to keep Black and white and brown people from organizing together. And the bill passed in the House, but now already we're hearing that there are those who are going to want to filibuster it in the Senate. And the question is, will we allow the filibuster rule that has been used down through the years to block women's rights and block LGBT rights and block the rights of Black people and brown people? Will we sit aside again and let it be used to block people's access to unions again? Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. As long as we are getting reports now that since the election, since the inauguration, since the change, there have been 258 voter suppression laws put in various states around this country. And the states with the highest number of voter suppression laws being proposed are the poorest states and the low wage states and the states with the least amount of health care and the states that are also cutting public education. What we are finding is that the same people that push voter suppression laws are the same ones that are against public education and against union rights and against health care and against living wages. And if they are cynical enough to be together, we have to be smart enough to come together. The truth of the matter is, like a contrast die in our body politics, the failure of the Trump presidency and COVID has exposed the fissures of racial disparity and poverty in America. And it has shown that far too many are still more interested in money than dealing with people's misery, more interested in lying to the people than protecting the people, more interested in stealing Supreme Court seats than keeping people out of caskets. And we can't believe the myth that what we saw for 4 years was just the problem of one person. Somebody said it like this: whatever the state of mind of the past president was, his mental health, 75 million Americans were willing to entrust our government to him and his thinking again. If he has mental problems, what does that say about those who would entrust him again? And knowing that 75 million, nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop. Turn back now. I must tell people today, Sister Moss, I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but I'm being a bearer of telling it that people might be inspired not to celebrate too quick, not to say to get too happy, but to keep pushing. Do you know that actually in this past election, though he lost by some 8 million popular votes, Trump actually came closer to the presidency this time than he did in 2016 because he was only about 47,000 votes. If 47,000 votes in 2 or 3 states had gone the other way, the Electoral College would have elected him, the racist Electoral College. But there's also another reason, as I close, that nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop now, and that is we have power. Nobody fights you this hard if you're weak. Nobody works so hard to keep the educators away from the Latinos, and the Latinos away from black folk, and the black folk away from the poor and low-wealth white people, and the people fighting for environmental justice away from the people fighting for healthcare. Nobody fights this hard to keep us separate if you're weak. Pornographic sums of money are being spent to divide and conquer. As Richard Nixon said in 1968, we can win, but we must engage in positive polarization. We must deliberately keep the nation divided. We can never afford to allow the masses of people to find themselves together in the same room, because if they do, they will reshape the American democracy. And nothing would be more tragic, because in the midst of all of this, did you know that in 15 states, for instance, if you just organize 1 to 19% of poor and low wealth voters, that's why the President Pring, I'm just looking to get together with you, because just imagine, we did a study called Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low Wealth Voters, and it showed this from Columbia University. Okay, I got it. They said, got a few minutes, so I'm gonna rush on. They said, listen, the poor people now make up 1/3 of the electorate, almost 65 million people. 34 million people, poor and low wealth people, voted in this past election, but some 20 plus million didn't. But it also showed that in 15 states, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, that if poor and low wealth people were organized around an agenda for wages, an agenda for more commitment to public education, an agenda for healthcare, that if you could just get 1% that are already registered to vote, poor and low wealth people, and 19% in North Carolina, 4% in Florida, you could overcome the margin of victories that determine who sits in the Senate and who sits in the White House. Notice what I said, not 30%, not 40%, but if we could just get 1 to 19%, and that's where all of these attacks are coming from, because the power is so possible and so clear. And so if we want to heal America, we've got to bind up our broken bodies. We must hear the voices and the cries of the 140 million poor and low wealth people. Healing America means that we recognize the cost of the division. We lose $1 trillion a year from child poverty. We've lost $2.6 trillion from lost earnings, from gender and racial gaps in hiring and wages. And there's no reason this needs to happen. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop now. That's why when we met with the Biden team, we took in coal miners from Appalachia, and black people from Alabama, and brown people from California, and fast food workers from the Carolinas. We took in teachers and farmers and fast food workers. I didn't go in by myself. We took 32 people in the room, and we said, listen, if you want to change this nation, enact full, comprehensive, just COVID relief, guarantee quality health care, raise the minimum wage to 15, update the poverty measure so we have a true measurement, make sure you provide equitable free COVID testing and treatment, free vaccines, Make sure that there's a national rent freeze and mortgage moratorium. Increase the impact of food and economic security programs like SNAP and WIC and child tax credits and earned tax credits. Resource all rural hospital and community centers, and increase support for public schools to provide continuous, equitable, quality, remote learning access, and build up our public education system. Enact the federal infrastructure jobs program. Protect and expand voting rights and civil rights. Put full restoration of the Voting Rights Act at the top of the agenda. Pass comprehensive just immigration reform, demilitarization and caging at the borders ended. Do police reform. And make sure that we overturn the Trump tax credit and that we redirect some of the bloated Pentagon budget towards public education and healthcare and living wages. Healing of the nation is not left or right. It's about repenting of our addiction to lies and reconstructing the systems of our shared life to serve everybody. And when we know that we can do this and it's possible, we must teach the nation. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. Trickle-down economics is not going to get it. Neoliberal economics is not going to get it. We must reconstruct America from the bottom up. We must ensure the establishment of justice and equal protection under the law. So I close here. Dr. King at the March on Washington said, normalcy never again. That was the speech then. And then that last night he was with us, he said nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. I'm combining and quitting. Normalcy never again. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now until the poor are lifted and the sick are healed and the children are educated and protected and humanity is respected and civil rights and union rights are never neglected. Normalcy never again. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. This is no time to be at ease in Zion. Those who know right must do right. We can't shrink back. We must go forward together. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. Normalcy never again. We can't turn around. We can't turn around. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. And we must declare normalcy never again until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I'm going to go holler and shout a little bit. My time is up. I turn it back over to you, Brother Noel.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Barber. It was absolutely powerful and exactly what I know I needed on this Sunday morning. And I'm sure that our members are all fired up and ready to take action, but not just any action, collective action. Right? Because we, as you said, we must continue to build our organizing muscle to organize for power, especially political power in every community, if we are truly going to bring about the change that is needed, not just for our students, but for this nation. So I want to challenge each and every one of you to think about the new choices you are going to make and the difference that you are going to be. You have spent the last 3 days learning and sharing. So what now? What next? What new commitments are you going to make? Words are great, but it's the action steps that produce great leaders and transform organizations. It's what transforms communities, and it is what is going to transform our nation. It's not just what we say, but it's about what we do. And remember, all of you were invited to be here because someone saw something special in you, or you saw something special in yourself. Either way, you are here to carry the torch of our work to ensure that our nation remains relevant, thriving, and student-centered well into the future. So here's what I'm going to do moving forward. I commit to take action with my union at the local, state, and national level when there's a call to organize for collective action. I commit to continue to register our youth and their families in BIPOC communities to vote. These are some of the actions that I'm sharing with you. And I ask you to think about what new commitments you will make to claw out every ounce of progress you can for our most vulnerable students. Our students are counting on each and every one of us, individually and collectively. They need us. They look to us. And as you run your leg of this relay, I want you to remember the words of Cesar Chavez. We cannot seek achievement for ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for our community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and need of others for their sakes and for our own. I want to thank you, the NEA leaders, and thank you again, Reverend Dr. Barber, for empowering us this morning and giving us the words that are going to help take us to the next level. So I want to bring back Vice President Princess Moss and our NEA President Becky Pringle. Princess, I understand that you have a winner to announce.
Oh, wow. Yes, I have a winner. Oh my gosh, we're all winners after that incredible message, Noel. Oh my gosh. Oh wow. I am just still processing and still reeling from excitement. But I do have an announcement to make. And that is our final winner for the 2021 NEA Virtual Leadership Summit. Winners are chosen randomly from those logged into this session. Before I announce the winner, I do want to give a final thanks to NEA member benefits for their continued support of the summit. And now the winner, who will receive $1,000, drum roll please, it is Margaret Brown from the Oklahoma Education Association. Congratulations, Margaret. Becky, over to you.
Oh my, wow. Wow, I am full in this moment. As we conclude our first ever virtual leadership summit, the 2021 NEA Leadership Summit that will go down in history, I need to thank you, Princess. As chair of the summit design team, you did just an amazing job. I asked you as the chair to make this the most amazing experience for our members that they could possibly even dream of. You went far beyond that, Princess. And I know you would be the first to say that your partner, our Director of Leadership Development, Mr. Corey Wolford, joins you in a powerful partnership to help us bring this experience to our members. And then, of course, the members of your design team. Oh my goodness, what an incredible job they have done. So I wanted to say that. I need to remind you all of an ask we made Friday and yesterday, but also I want to add another one, because you know when you're in my presence, I'm not going to let you go without asking you to do something. Actions that we need you to take. You saw Princess fanning herself yesterday and saying she needed to settle down. No, Princess, don't settle down. Can't settle down. No, none of us can settle down. Our students need our energy and activism. And sometimes they need our righteous indignation to ensure they have the resources that we fought for, that are in now the American Rescue Plan, and that those resources are used in ways that include you, our education leaders, our practitioners, in deciding where those funds go. So we will be reaching out to you and providing you with information to let you know how you can lead on that work so you can have the impact we must have as both association and as practitioner leaders. They need us to lead our students, to lead on the learning opportunities to address their academic and social and emotional needs. And then we also need you to help us fight against further harming them by giving unreliable, invalid standardized tests And they need us to not only just fight against those meaningless, racially unjust tests, but they need us to fight for the kind of more complete and comprehensive and authentic system of assessment that will actually give us, as educators, what we need to help every one of our students grow and thrive. So as we end, I want to thank again our keynote speaker on Friday, Nancy, for reminding us that our democracy is fragile, and it's each generation's responsibility to ensure that we become that more perfect union. I want to thank my fellow student, Dr. Perry, Andre to me, because I taught him when he was in kindergarten. I done good, right? Owning up to his mistake and apologizing and then doing what he must to lead on repairing that harm. Dr. Perry reminded us that schools are part of interconnected systems, and we must bring to bear our power in all of those systems so our students get what they need when they need it. And of course, wow, Dr. Barber, normalcy will never be what we embrace again. NEA will not shrink back. We will press on. We understand the power that is possible. We will heed Malcolm Jamal Warner's call to us to speak up, to use our voice, use our collective action, use our power, because NEA, when we stand in our power, there's nothing we can do. When we stand in our power, we can transform public education into a racially and socially just and equitable system that sees our students' humanity. NEA, we will stand in our power. We will, and we will get it done. We will be worthy of our students. Thank you so very much for joining us on this beautiful Sunday morning for the conclusion of our summit. Thank you, Princess. Thank you, Noel. Thank you. Please stay safe. The road to the White House honors three simple yet powerful words: Black Lives Matter. This plaza is iconic, like the memorials to Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. It symbolizes the struggle for freedom and equality. As members of the National Education Association, we gather in these sacred places to demand justice and equity for Black lives in all places, in all forms. It is our responsibility as educators to ensure that every student feels welcome in school. Some may try to divide us, but we know that working together, we can make a better future. To our Black students, colleagues, and families, you matter. Your trauma matters. Your voice matters. Your protest matters. Your dreams matter. We mourn with you. We stand with you. And we organize with you to demand change.
We demand
a re-examination of the role of law enforcement in our communities and our schools. We must dismantle unjust policies that disproportionately impact Black people.
We demand
investment in the physical, mental, and economic health and growth of Black people. That means addressing the ways corporations have exploited and stolen wealth from Black and Native communities and then making them whole.
We demand
that Black educator and student voices be included in decisions that impact their schools and their communities. When students, families, and educators come together, to ensure racial justice in public schools, it strengthens the entire community.
We demand
Free, fair, and accessible elections. We must end voter suppression tactics politicians use to keep communities of color from having a voice in our government. The future is the sum of the changes we demand, the courage we display, how we stand with each other and for each other. Together, we can rewrite the rules and hold decision makers accountable to guarantee justice for Black lives in our schools and our communities. We will not rest until there is a future where Black lives thrive.